The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just landed. My daughter Zola was still wearing her airplane socks, the little ones with the grip pads on the bottom that she'd refused to take off for the entire 11-hour flight from Lisbon. We had one suitcase each. We'd been gone 6 months. I had a meeting scheduled for 9 the next morning, and I was already composing the opening line in my head when my grandmother Dora walked toward us through the arrivals hall at Hartsfield-Jackson and looked at Zola, my Zola, who has my same wide forehead and my late mother's exact shade of deep brown eyes, and turned to the nearest uniformed security officer and announced, with complete certainty and no hesitation at all, "This child does not belong to me." Zola didn't cry. She didn't grab my hand. She looked at my grandmother for exactly 2 seconds, then walked calmly to the information desk 20 feet away, stood on her toes to reach the counter, and whispered something to the officer stationed there. His face went white. He turned slowly toward me, then toward my grandmother, then back to me. "Your mother just filed a, some people in my family still think what happened next was an overreaction. I need you to tell me if they're right." The arrivals hall was loud the way airports always are. Wheels on tile, a gate announcement overhead. A child somewhere crying in a register higher than Zola had ever cried in her life. The afternoon light came through the glass at a low angle and lit up the dust in the air. My grandmother stood near the baggage claim pillar in the wool coat she wears regardless of the weather, her handbag over one arm, her posture the same as it has been my entire life, upright, deliberate, constructed for observation. She had driven 40 minutes to pick us up. That was the part I kept returning to in the minutes that followed. She had driven 40 minutes. She had parked in the hourly lot. She had stood there and waited, and then she had done it anyway. Zola was still at the information desk. The officer, a man in his 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, was speaking to her in a low voice. Zola was nodding the way she nods when she's listening carefully, very still, mouth slightly open. My grandmother had not moved from her spot near the pillar. She was watching the officer with the expression she wears when she thinks she's being observed unfairly, which is to say, chin lifted, eyes cool, entirely certain of herself. I did not walk to my grandmother first. I walked to my daughter. "Baby," I said, touching her shoulder. "I've got it." Zola turned and looked up at me. "She said I wasn't hers, Mama." "I know." In front of the security man. "I know, come here." She stepped into my side and I kept my hand on her back and I looked at the officer and said, very quietly, "What exactly did my grandmother file?" He hesitated. "Let me tell you how we got here. My grandmother Dora Fontaine has lived in the same house in Cascade for 31 years. It is a brick colonial with black shutters and a garden she tends with a level of aggression that I have always found slightly frightening. She planted the roses herself. She edged the lawn herself. She has, on more than one occasion, called the city on her neighbors for parking infractions. She is 81 years old, and she has never, in my entire life, been wrong about anything. Or at least, she has never admitted to it. She raised me after my mother died. I was 9. My mother was her youngest daughter, gone at 33 from a brain aneurysm that announced itself with exactly no warning on a Thursday morning while she was making coffee. My grandmother drove over, assessed the situation, arranged the funeral, enrolled me in her district's school by the following Monday, and never spoke about grief as a thing that required time. She spoke about it the way she spoke about most things, as a problem that discipline could address. I am not telling you she was cruel. She wasn't. She fed me, clothed me, came to every school event, helped me apply to colleges, sat at the kitchen table, and checked my essays for grammar. She loved me in the architecture of a person who had already lost too much and decided the safest response was to hold everything tightly enough that it couldn't leave. But she never thought I was capable of anything she hadn't already mapped out for me. That is the distinction, and it matters. The plan, as Grandma Dora saw it, was this. I would finish my degree in business administration, the same degree my Uncle Terence had, who managed a mid-sized distribution company in Mableton. I would get a stable job with benefits and a pension if possible. I would find a man from a good family who was reliably employed, and I would build a life that looked like security. She did not use the word ambition as a compliment. She used it the way you describe a reckless driver, someone moving too fast in a direction no one had approved. I graduated at 22. I had already been freelancing for 3 years by then, management consulting work I'd picked up through a professor who thought I was worth recommending. But I kept that quiet at home because the money was inconsistent and Grandma Dora's tolerance for inconsistency was essentially zero. The week I graduated, she sat me down at the kitchen table with a printed list of job postings she had found online. She had organized them by salary range, descending. "Start with the top 5, she told me. "You can always move later once you have a foundation." I thanked her. That night, I signed a contract for a project-based consulting engagement that would pay me more in 4 months than the top listing on her sheet paid in a year. I didn't tell her. The foundation, I had decided, would be built somewhere she couldn't see it yet. My Uncle Terence was the one who first said it out loud. We were at Grandma Dora's house for a Sunday dinner. This was maybe 8 months after I graduated, during a stretch when I was working 14-hour days and had started to understand, in a way that felt both terrifying and clarifying, that I was genuinely good at this. And Terence looked at me across the table and said, not unkindly, but with the specific energy of someone who has decided kindness requires honesty. "You know, consulting is not a real career, right? It's just what people do while they figure out what they actually want to do." Grandma Dora made a sound of agreement. I passed him the bread basket. "That's interesting," I said. "I hadn't thought of it that way." That same week, I closed my first 6-figure contract. I did not tell Terence. The thing about being consistently underestimated by the people who are supposed to know you best is that it does something to the part of you that makes decisions. It either breaks you into the shape they already believe you are, or it turns every dismissal into a data point, every skeptical look into a coordinate on a map you are drawing in private. I had made my choice early. I kept the map to myself. When Zola was born, I was 27. Her father, Demi Osai, was a good man with a talent for leaving, not dramatically, not cruelly, just incrementally, in the way that some people exit a room. You don't notice until they're already gone. He moved to Vancouver when Zola was 14 months old. We were never married. He is consistent with child support and he calls her every Sunday, and I have made a deliberate decision not to characterize him to my daughter in any direction because she is 8 years old and she deserves to form her own understanding of the people who love her. He and I are fine. We were never the story. The story was always Grandma Dora. She adored Zola. That is the true thing, and I need you to understand it before any of what comes next. She held her at the hospital with an expression I had never seen on her face before, something open, unguarded, genuinely surprised by tenderness. She kept a framed photo of Zola on the mantle between the photo of my mother at her college graduation and the photo of my grandfather Emile, who died before I was born. When Zola was 3 and went through the phase where she called everything a big loud thing, loud colors, loud smells, loud people, Grandma Dora laughed, actually laughed, in a way that made her look 20 years younger. But she loved Zola the way she loved most things, with authority, with the assumption that love meant control, and that control meant she knew best, and that knowing best meant her version of the future was the one that should be arranged for. The first time it became a problem, Zola was 4. We had come for Easter. Zola wanted to wear a yellow dress she had picked out herself at the store. This was the phase where she had extremely strong opinions about yellow, and Grandma Dora had laid out something white and structured on the guest bed instead, something she had bought specifically for the occasion. And when Zola came downstairs in the yellow dress, Grandma Dora's face did something that I can only describe as closing. She didn't say anything to Zola directly. She said, while looking at me, "I bought the white one so she'd be presentable for the photos." Zola looked at me, I looked at Zola. "You look perfect," I told her, and we went to Easter in yellow. Grandma Dora did not speak to me directly for most of the meal. She spoke around me, through me, over me to Zola, who was 4 and oblivious and had a wonderful time. That evening, while Zola napped on the couch and Grandma Dora and I were alone in the kitchen, she said, "You let her run wild and you think it's freedom. It is not freedom. It is neglect dressed up as love." I dried a dish. I set it in the cabinet. I said, "Thank you for the Easter dinner, Grandma. It was lovely." That night, I called my attorney, Renata Solis, not about Easter. There was nothing to call about regarding Easter, but because I had been meaning to update my estate documents since Zola's last birthday and I kept putting it off. I told Renata I wanted the trust amended, specifically the section about guardianship. She said she'd send me a draft by Wednesday. It was not about Grandma Dora. Not then. I just found that after certain conversations, I became very motivated to handle things I had been postponing. The incidents that followed were not dramatic in isolation. They accumulated the way water accumulates in a low spot, each drop unremarkable, the pooling something you only register once you're standing in it. When Zola was 5, Grandma Dora told her in front of me that her natural hair needed taming before school pictures. I took Zola to the bathroom, re-moisturized her twist out, told her she looked extraordinary, and she went to school and stood in front of that camera like she owned the gymnasium. I did not engage Grandma Dora about the comment. I went home and called the pediatrician the next day to ask about age-appropriate therapy resources, not because anything was wrong, but because I believed, as a general principle, in having those resources identified before they were needed. The pediatrician gave me 3 names. I kept them in my phone. When Zola was 6, Grandma Dora told my Uncle Terence, loudly enough for me to hear from the next room, that she worried Zola was confused because I traveled for work and the childcare arrangement was unconventional. Zola was at school. I was in the next room. I stood in the hallway for exactly 4 seconds, then walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and said nothing. Terence gave me the look he always gives me, sympathetic, slightly uncomfortable, ultimately complicit in the way of someone who does not want to spend political capital at the family table, and I gave him a small smile and asked how his kids were doing. That evening, I was on a call with a developer in Singapore. The project would add, when it closed, enough to Zola's trust to cover 4 years at any university in the country without touching the principal. I did not think about what Grandma Dora had said while I was on that call. I thought about the numbers, which were very good, and about Zola, who had left me a drawing on my laptop that showed the 2 of us on an airplane with the caption, "Mama and me going somewhere," in her careful, slightly tilted 7-year-old handwriting. If you have ever been counted out by someone who should have loved you better, you already know what that silence feels like. Not the passive silence of someone who can't defend themselves. The deliberate silence of someone who has already decided the arena where this gets settled, and it is not at the Sunday dinner table. The pattern, if I'm being precise about it, was this. Grandma Dora did not think I was competent. She had decided this when I was 9, and my mother died, and she stepped in, and the decision had calcified over 30 years into something she no longer examined, because it was structural to her understanding of who she was. She was the capable one. I was the one who had been taken care of. Those roles had an order to them, a hierarchy she had maintained so long it felt to her like natural law. She never meant to be cruel. That is the thing that makes it complicated to explain to people who didn't grow up in it. She was not a villain who twirled her fingers and plotted. She was a woman who loved me and was also profoundly, constitutively certain that she knew what was best for me and for my daughter, and that her certainty was itself a form of love. She would have told you, if asked, that everything she did came from love. She would not have been lying. But love that doesn't allow for your competence isn't protection. It's occupation. The Portugal trip had been planned for 8 months. I had a consulting engagement with a firm based in Lisbon, a substantial one, the kind that required presence rather than remote access. And I had decided, after a lot of thought, to bring Zola rather than leave her for 6 months with Grandma Dora, which had been the assumption in the family, apparently, without anyone asking me directly. When I told Grandma Dora we were going together, her response was measured in the way that responses are measured when the person delivering them has decided to be strategic. You're taking an 8-year-old to live abroad. For 6 months. Yes. She looked at me the way she looks at things she has already decided are mistakes. Zola needs stability. She needs her school, her routine. You're disrupting all of that for your career. Zola's school approved the leave, she'll have tutoring, and she'll live in Lisbon for 6 months, which is, I think, a good thing for an 8-year-old. You think. The phrase landed like a verdict. You think a lot of things. I looked at my grandmother. I thought about 30 years of being told, in various registers, that I thought incorrectly. I thought about the trust documents Renata had updated 18 months ago. I thought about Zola upstairs packing her yellow backpack with a seriousness and focus that made my chest ache with something that was not quite pride because it was bigger than that. I do, I said. I think quite a lot. It's gone pretty well. I drove home. Zola and I left for Lisbon 9 days later. The 6 months were extraordinary. Zola learned 40 words in Portuguese, developed an opinion about pastis de nata that she expressed with a solemnity usually reserved for important decisions, made a friend named Beatriz who she still writes letters to by hand, and grew approximately 4 centimeters, which she verified repeatedly using the measuring tape she had brought specifically for this purpose. I worked. I delivered everything the engagement required, and then some. I had 2 additional conversations with Renata during that period, one routine, one not. By the time we boarded the plane home, something that had been in motion for a long time was almost finished. I was prepared for the reunion to be awkward. I was prepared for Grandma Dora to be cool, to have some stored complaint ready, to make some comment about Zola's weight or her hair or whether the tutoring had kept her on grade level. I was not prepared for what she actually did, the arrivals hall, the security officer, Zola's small, certain feet walking toward the information desk. And the officer's voice, going pale in register before his face caught up. Your mother just filed an emergency petition with Fulton County Family Court this morning. She's claiming that you are an unfit parent and requesting emergency temporary guardianship of your daughter. I stood in the arrivals hall with my hand on my daughter's back and the officer's words still in the air between us, and for exactly 3 seconds, I felt the floor of my entire understanding of the situation shift underneath me. Then it stopped shifting, because I had built the floor myself and I had built it to hold. I see, I said. Zola looked up at me. Her expression was careful in the way children's expressions get careful when they sense that the adults around them are managing something large. She was still wearing the airplane socks. I squeezed her shoulder once. Is there paperwork I need to receive? I asked the officer. He cleared his throat. The petition was filed this morning. You'd typically be served formally, but the filer indicated you were arriving today, so she filed before we landed. I turned that over once. All right, thank you. My grandmother had not moved from the pillar. I walked toward her with Zola beside me and I kept my pace even and my face neutral, and I stopped close enough that this was a private conversation. Grandma, my voice was quiet. What did you do? She lifted her chin the way she does. I did what any mother would do. You have been unreachable for 6 months. You took my great-granddaughter to a foreign country without adequate consultation. I told you we were going, you knew the dates, you had my number, my address, and Renata's contact information in case of emergency. Renata. The name came out compressed with displeasure. Your lawyer. Yes, I'm aware you have a lawyer. Zola's hand found mine. I held it. You need to call your attorney, I said to my grandmother, and withdraw the petition. Today. She looked at me with the expression of someone who has made a large bet and is not yet prepared to consider the odds. I will not be doing that. I looked at her for a moment. My grandmother in her wool coat, with her correct posture, who had driven 40 minutes to an airport to pick us up and had, apparently, also found time before departure to file paperwork with Fulton County Family Court to take my daughter from me. Okay, I said. I called Renata from the parking deck. Here is what Renata Solis said, in the specific voice she uses when she has already thought several moves ahead and is pacing her delivery so I can keep up. The petition is real, it was filed at 8:47 this morning, and it is going to be dismissed. The standard for emergency temporary guardianship in Georgia requires demonstration of immediate harm. You were on a scheduled return flight. Zola was in your care. There is no emergency. The judge will see that. How long? Hearing is likely inside 3 weeks given how it was filed. I'll request expedited dismissal Monday morning. I was sitting in the driver's seat of the rental car I'd arranged before landing. Zola was in the back with her headphones on, watching something on her tablet, giving me privacy the way she had learned to give me privacy, quietly, without announcement, without making it a production. She was 8. She had the social intelligence of someone twice her age, which I took no credit for and was simply grateful for every day. Renata, she filed this at the airport. She timed it for when I landed. A pause. I know. That's not concern, that's a move. Yes, Renata said. It is, which is why I want you to come in on Monday. There are some things we should discuss about the current structure of Zola's trust and your documentation. Given what Dora just demonstrated about her intentions, I want everything fortified in a way that makes this kind of filing not just losable, but obviously losable. So it doesn't happen again. I looked through the windshield at the concrete wall of the parking deck, level 4. The fluorescent light above me had a flicker to it, a brief pulse every few seconds that I found, for some reason, steadying. Monday, I said. 9 o'clock. I drove home. I made Zola scrambled eggs because that was what she asked for. She told me about the movie she'd watched on the plane, something animated, a lot of singing. She demonstrated two of the songs with complete lyrical confidence. And I listened and I laughed in the right places, and when she was in the bath, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and thought, with great precision, about what had just happened and what it meant and what I was going to do about it. The petition was one thing. The petition, Renata had already confirmed, was going to fail. It was not built on anything that could hold up to scrutiny. I had been a present, attentive, financially stable parent for 8 years. I had documentation of Zola's schooling, her health care, her living arrangements, her travel arrangements, her trust. I had Renata, who was extremely good and who had, at various points in our professional relationship, described my level of preparation as unusual and occasionally alarming, and once, memorably, the kind of thing that makes opposing counsel physically tired. The petition would fail, but Grandma Dora had filed it, in public, at an airport, timed for my arrival. And I needed to understand what that meant about what she believed, what she wanted, and how far she was prepared to go, because a woman who files emergency custody paperwork timed to humiliate her granddaughter at the airport is not acting from a single frustrated impulse. That is a decision. That is a plan. And plans have architects and they have reasons, and I had not yet found all of the load-bearing walls. I went to bed. I slept 6 hours. In the morning, I began to look. To understand the preparation, you need to understand the thing that was already built before the airport ever happened. Not because I want to impress you with the inventory of it. I am not telling you this story to make you think I am impressive, but because the shape of what I had built is the reason Grandma Dora's petition was always going to fail, and also the reason she had filed it in the first place, which are two sides of the same fact. I had kept my work private, from family specifically, for one reason. What they didn't know they couldn't undermine. I had watched Terrence, over 20 years, make every major professional decision with the weight of family opinion pressing on it. The job he didn't take because Grandma Dora thought the company was unstable. The investment he didn't make because someone at a Sunday dinner said the market was uncertain. He was not a stupid man. He was a man who had let the family's collective anxiety about risk function as his personal ceiling, and the ceiling was low. I had decided, at 22, that my ceiling was going to be a structural problem for the family to discover later, not a constraint they got to apply early. What that decision had produced over 13 years was this: a consulting practice that I had incorporated, grown, and eventually restructured into a partnership with two other principals, Kwame Sant, who handled operational work in West Africa and the UK, and Yui Mitsukawa, who ran our Asia-Pacific relationships out of Tokyo. The Lisbon engagement had been the third major European project in 4 years. The trust Renata managed on Zola's behalf was funded, specifically and intentionally, at a level that would cover every major life expense she might encounter through age 25 without requiring my active contribution, which meant that even in the event of my incapacity, it was structurally independent. I had chosen Renata because she did not soothe. She strategized. Every document she had ever handed me was built to survive a challenge from someone motivated and well-funded. None of it had ever been mentioned at a Sunday dinner. The close calls, when they came, had required a particular kind of composure. The first one I remember clearly was about 3 years before Lisbon. Zola was 5. We were at Grandma Dora's for her birthday dinner. Grandma Dora's, not Zola's, and Terrence's daughter Imani, who was 23 at the time and in her first year of law school and therefore extremely confident about everything, asked me over the salad course how business was going. "Fine," I said. "Steady. Still doing the consulting thing?" Imani had the tone of someone who was genuinely curious but had already formed the opinion that informed the question. "Still doing it." "She should talk to your father," Grandma Dora told Imani, refilling her own water glass. "He knows people in corporate HR. There are good stable positions. I'm good, actually." I speared a piece of cucumber. "But tell him I said hello." Imani's eyes moved between me and Grandma Dora with the alert calculation of someone who understood that something was happening beneath the surface of the conversation and had not yet decided which side of it she was on. She leaned forward slightly. "Are you incorporated? Like, do you have a structure, or is it—" "I have a structure." I smiled at her. It was a real smile. "Pass the bread?" She passed the bread. The moment dissolved into the general noise of the table. Grandma Dora began talking about her neighbor's fence permit dispute, and Terrence chimed in, and the subject of my business evaporated entirely. That night, at 11 o'clock, I finalized the terms of a partnership agreement with Quame that we had been negotiating for 6 weeks. I had been drafting my portion of the term sheet on my phone under the table during the salad course. The bread request had not been entirely about bread. The second close call was sharper. It was 18 months before the Lisbon trip. A Sunday dinner again, Grandma Dora's house functioned as the family's social gravity, pulling everyone back on rotation whether they intended to orbit it or not. And Grandma Dora had invited a woman named Celestine Mobley, who was the grandmother of someone at her church and apparently also a retired family court mediator, which I did not understand to be relevant until 20 minutes into the meal when the conversation arrived, with suspicious smoothness. At the topic of what happened to children whose parents traveled extensively for work, Celestine was gracious. She was also clearly prepared for the conversation. She talked about stability indicators and primary attachment consistency with the fluency of someone reciting from a framework. Zola was in the next room watching television. I could hear the particular tinny audio signature of the show she was watching. I set my fork down. I looked at Celestine and then at Grandma Dora, and I said, in the Pleasant Register, I had developed over years of exactly this kind of ambush. This is a fascinating topic. Do you work with many families where the parent has a documented support structure, consistent housing, school continuity, and an established legal guardian framework? Celestine blinked. Well, yes, those factors are certainly, because I ask because those are the primary indicators courts actually weight, in my understanding. I'm curious whether that matches your experience. A short silence. Terrence was looking at his plate. Celestine said, carefully, yes, that's accurate. Those are significant factors. Great. I picked my fork back up. The roast is wonderful, Grandma. Is that the same marinade you used at Christmas? Grandma Dora's expression did something complicated. She said yes, it was the same marinade. I drove home that evening, called Renata the next morning, and told her I wanted to update the documentation around Zola's legal guardian framework specifically. Not because anything was wrong, but because I wanted every piece of paper in that category to be, in Renata's words, the kind of thing that makes a challenge feel embarrassing before it's finished. I can do that, Renata said. I've been meaning to suggest it. How thorough do you want to be? Thorough enough that it's obvious, I told her. I want it to read like someone who knew someone was going to look. 3 weeks later, Renata sent me a folder that was, genuinely, beautiful in its construction, not legally beautiful in a way I can fully describe to you because I am not an attorney, but beautiful in the way that a very well-built thing is beautiful when you understand what it was built to withstand. I put a copy in the safe in my home office. I put a copy in the firm's document storage. Renata kept the original. The third close call came 4 months before Lisbon. I had already booked the flights. I had already enrolled Zola in the tutoring program through the school's international leave protocol. I had already arranged the apartment in Alfama, 3rd floor, 2 bedrooms, a view of the river that Zola would later draw approximately 14 pictures of, and I had told exactly no one in the family except that we were going. Grandma Dora called me on a Wednesday evening. Not a Sunday, a Wednesday. She did not begin with pleasantries. I want to understand your financial situation. I was at my desk. I had a contract open on one screen and a project timeline on the other. I leaned back in my chair. What about it? You're taking Zola abroad for 6 months. That's expensive. You're self-employed. I want to know that you're not doing this on credit. The thing about my grandmother is that she is not wrong to want that information in the abstract. If I were actually financially unstable, that would be a legitimate concern. The wrongness was in the assumption, the years deep, completely unexamined certainty that instability was the likely condition to discover. I'm not doing it on credit, I said. Then show me. I looked at my desk. At the contract open on the screen, which was for an amount that would have resolved Grandma Dora's question so completely it would have ended the conversation in a way that I was not yet ready for. At the project timeline. At the photograph of Zola on my desk, taken in Cascais on a trial trip we'd taken the previous summer, her standing at the edge of a sea wall with her arms out like she was about to fly. Grandma, I said, I'm 43 years old and I haven't asked you for money since I was 19. My daughter has never needed anything I couldn't provide. I understand that you worry, but what you're asking for isn't reassurance. It's an audit. I don't owe you my financial records. The silence on the line was the specific silence of someone recalibrating. I am trying, she said, and her voice was different for a moment, lower, something honest in it, to look after that child. I know you are, and I meant it, I did know that. So am I, and I'm going to keep doing it in Lisbon and when we get back and for the rest of her life. She hung up without saying goodbye, which was not unusual for her. I finished the contract. I booked the supplemental travel insurance for the Lisbon trip that same evening, the kind that included medical evacuation, coverage, and legal assistance abroad, and I emailed the confirmation to Renata with a note that said, adding this to the documentation package. She replied within 20 minutes, good. I was already thinking about what comes next. The Monday after we landed, I went to Renata's office. It's a clean, spare space in Buckhead, not flashy, exactly the kind of place where serious things get done by people who have no interest in impressing you with the furniture. Renata met me at the door in the way she does when the conversation she has planned is one she wants to control the pacing of. She handed me a coffee before I sat down. I pulled the petition. She settled across from me with her own mug. It is exactly what I said it was, thin, emotional, legally insufficient. But. The framing she used, Renata tapped the copy on her desk. She referenced the trust. She referenced the Lisbon trip. She referenced the fact that you've declined to share financial information with the family. She looked at me steadily. She didn't file this blind, Adiz. Someone helped her understand what language to use. I sat with that for a moment. My full name, Adiz Fontaine-Acafer, the hyphen a deliberate choice I'd made at 30 because both halves were mine, felt, in Renata's office, exactly as weighted as it actually was. The name my grandmother had given me informally, the surname I had constructed for myself officially, and the whole architecture of a life that was mine and no one else's. She has an attorney, I said. She has an attorney. Renata turned the petition to face me and pointed to the letterhead at the top. Gideon Platt, he's competent, not excellent but competent, and whoever briefed him gave him enough to make the petition look more considered than it actually is. Who briefed him? That I don't know yet. She pulled the copy back. But Adiz, given that she filed this the morning you landed, given the timing, the language, the fact that it references specific structural elements of your financial life that she shouldn't have details about, she let the sentence rest there. Someone in the family talked to him, I said. That's my read. I thought about Terrence looking at his plate at the Sunday dinner where Celestine Mobley had talked about stability indicators. I thought about Imani asking me if I was incorporated. I thought about the specific shape of my grandmother's certainty at the airport, not just hurt, not just worried, but staged. Positioned. The wool coat, the pillar, the security officer already close by when she made her announcement. Okay, I said. What do we do? Renata set her mug down. We file the response Monday. We request expedited dismissal. We provide the documentation package, which is, as you know, comprehensive enough to answer every claim in the petition before the judge even finishes reading it. A beat. And then we have a different conversation about what you want the outcome to be, because the petition failing is one result. What happens after the petition fails, how it fails, what it leaves behind, what position you're in when it's over, that's a different question. I looked at her. There's a second issue, Renata continued. Your grandmother's house. I went still. The property in Cascade, the Colonial. She opened a second folder. I had my title researcher pull the records after you called me from the airport. Adiz, your grandmother refinanced that property 14 months ago. Second mortgage. And the entity listed as the secondary beneficiary on her estate documents, she turned the page toward me and put one finger on a line of text. The name of the entity was not my name. It was not Zola's Trust. It was an LLC I had never heard of, registered 8 months ago in Georgia with a registered agent that shared an address with Gideon Platt's office. The room was very quiet. Renata watched me read it twice. Who formed it? My voice came out steady, which I noted with some detachment as an achievement. We're still pulling the full formation documents, but the managing member listed on the initial filing, she pointed again, is Terrence Ape. I set the paper down. Outside Renata's window, Buckhead was going about its morning traffic, a delivery truck double-parked, 2 women at a cafe table with their phones, the ordinary texture of a city not involved in what was happening in this office. I watched it for a moment, then I looked back at Renata. How long have you known about this? 24 hours, she said. I wanted confirmation before I said anything. I picked up my coffee. It had gone lukewarm while I was reading. I drank it anyway because I needed something to do with my hands that was not what my hands wanted to do, which was shake. Not from fear. from the specific physical response to understanding that something you had been peripherally aware of as a possibility was, in fact, a certainty and had been moving toward you for longer than you knew. He's going to inherit the house, I said. He is the managing member of the entity that stands to inherit the house, yes. And the house, with its current mortgage structure, would transfer with the debt unless the estate has enough other assets to cover it. I thought about the house, the garden, 31 years, the photo of my mother on the mantle, which it won't. Correct. So the house passes to an LLC he controls, the LLC absorbs the debt, and whatever equity remains, which is substantial, the property is worth considerably more than the mortgage balance, becomes an asset of the LLC. Renata's voice was level. An LLC he controls. Without you, without Zola. I thought about the petition. I thought about Celestine Mobley at the dinner table, about the Wednesday phone call demanding financial records, about Grandma Dora at the arrivals pillar in her wool coat, about Terrence looking at his plate. I thought about what Grandma Dora had said at the airport to the security officer, loud enough to be heard. This child does not belong to me. She had believed she was beginning a process that would end with Zola in her custody and me removed from the picture, discredited, documented as unfit, legally sidestepped. And once that process began, Terrence and his LLC would be positioned as the responsible, stable family structure that Grandma Dora's estate would naturally flow toward. The petition wasn't about love. It was about the house. It was about control of the story. It was about the fact that I had, apparently without anyone realizing it, accumulated enough to matter in the inheritance math, not because I wanted any of it, but because I existed and Zola existed and Terrence had decided we were a variable that needed to be neutralized. Renata, I set down the coffee cup. How much time do we have before the hearing? 3 weeks, maybe less if I push. Push. I pulled my phone out and opened my calendar. I want the documentation package submitted by Wednesday. I want a full title search on every asset connected to Dora Ake Fontaine's estate. I want the LLC formation pulled completely, every document, every name, every date. I looked up. And I want to know when Gideon Platt was first contacted, because if the timeline of that LLC's formation and the first contact with Platt overlap with the period after I told Grandma Dora we were going to Lisbon, then this wasn't reactive. Renata had been writing. She stopped, looked at me with the expression she gets when she is reassessing a situation upward. If it wasn't reactive, she said slowly, then it was planned. I put my phone down, before I even landed, before the airport, before the wool coat and the security officer and my daughter walking to the information desk in her airplane socks. I could hear my own voice, even, precise, exactly where I needed it to be. They planned this while we were in Lisbon, and I want to know every date, every document, and every person in that room when they did. Renata closed the folder. She straightened it against the edge of her desk with the flat of her hand, a small, definitive gesture, the kind she makes when something has shifted from assessment to motion. I'll have preliminary findings by Friday, she said. And Adiz. She looked at me directly. I want you to understand something. What I'm describing, if the timeline holds, if the planning precedes the petition, this is not a family dispute anymore. This is a coordinated attempt to remove you from your own child's life in order to control a property transfer. That has legal language that goes well beyond family court. I stood up. I picked up my bag. I thought, briefly, about Zola at home with the sitter, probably doing the Portuguese vocabulary exercises she had decided to keep up because she liked Beatriz and intended to write her letters that were fully comprehensible, not just enthusiastic. I know what it is, I said. I thanked Renata. I walked out into the Buckhead morning. I sat in my car for 30 seconds with both hands on the steering wheel, not because I was uncertain, but because I needed a moment with the full weight of it before I drove home to my daughter and made her lunch and listened to her talk about Beatriz and the letters and the 40 words of Portuguese she had learned and was now going to keep. Then I started the car. Renata called me the following Friday at 2:15 in the afternoon. I was at my desk. Quaim was on hold on the other line about a separate matter entirely. The city outside my window was ordinary and indifferent the way cities are. The timeline holds, Renata said. The LLC was formed 11 months ago. Gideon Platt was first contacted 9 months ago. You told your grandmother about Lisbon 8 months ago. A pause that had weight in it. They started this 3 months before you even told them you were leaving. I looked at the photograph of Zola on my desk. Seawall. Arms out, about to fly. Send me everything, I said. And the hearing was in 11 days, and everything I had spent 13 years building, quietly, carefully, without asking anyone's permission or inviting anyone's opinion, was about to be laid in front of a judge who had no idea what she was about to see. I want to know if you would have said what I said next, because I still think about it. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday. Renata had filed the response the previous Wednesday, as promised. The documentation package was, in her words, the kind of thing that tends to make a judge's posture change before she finishes the first page. I had received formal service of the petition on the Monday after the airport, a process server at my front door at 8 in the morning, Zola already at school, me in my work clothes holding a cup of coffee while a man in a beige jacket handed me an envelope and asked me to sign a form confirming receipt. I signed it. I closed the door. I called Renata. In the 9 days between the service and the hearing, 2 things happened that I had not fully anticipated. The first was that Grandma Dora called me every evening. Not to apologize, not to explain. To talk about ordinary things, whether I had restocked the pantry after Lisbon, whether Zola had gotten back into her school routine, whether the tutoring had left any gaps that needed to be addressed before the next academic assessment. Her voice was exactly as it always was, composed, certain, moving through the conversation the way she moved through the garden, tending, pruning, certain of the correct shape of things. She did not mention the petition. She did not mention Gideon Platt. She did not mention Terrence or the LLC or the refinanced mortgage. She behaved as though none of it existed. I answered her questions. I told her Zola was fine, back in routine, thriving. I told her the pantry was handled. I told her the tutoring had not left gaps, that Zola was, if anything, ahead of where she needed to be in 3 subjects and had opinions about this that she expressed with considerable confidence. I did not mention the hearing. I did not mention Renata. I did not mention what Renata's title researcher had found. I was very pleasant. I was very calm. And after each call, I sat for a moment in the specific quiet of a person who has found the load-bearing walls and knows exactly where to place the weight. The second thing that happened was that Imani called me. Not a family dinner call. A direct call, her personal number, on a Tuesday evening, 6 days after the airport. I was putting Zola to bed, and I let it go to voicemail, and I listened to it after, standing in the hallway outside Zola's closed door. Imani's voice on the voicemail was different from her dinner table voice. It was lower. It had something in it that I recognized, after a moment, as the sound of someone who has learned something they wish they hadn't and is not yet sure what to do about it. Adiz, it's me. I wanted to say, a pause, the sound of a door closing somewhere in her background. I didn't know about the petition until after it was filed. I want you to know that. I didn't know that was what the conversation was about. Another pause. I think you should call me back. I think there are things you should know. I can't do this over voicemail, but call me. I stood in the hallway for a moment, then I texted Renata. Imani Ape called me, says she didn't know about the petition before filing, says she has information. Renata's reply came in under 4 minutes, don't call her yet. Let me think about the best way to use this. I waited 2 days, then I called Imani. What she told me took 40 minutes and required me to sit down twice. I will give you the shape of it. Imani had been present at a dinner at Terrence's house 3 months before the Lisbon trip. A dinner I had not been invited to, which I noted, during which Terrence and his wife Brenda and Grandma Dora had discussed, in terms Imani described as really specific, like they'd been talking about it for a while already. What would happen to the Cascade house when Grandma Dora died? Terrence had presented the LLC structure as a way to protect the asset from probate complications. Grandma Dora had apparently found this reasonable and had signed documents at that meeting. Imani wasn't sure what documents specifically, but there had been documents, and the conversation had also included a section, toward the end of the evening, about whether Adiz, meaning me, would cause problems. Cause problems, I repeated. That's what he said. Imani's voice was tight. He said the only variable is whether Adiz causes problems. And Grandma said, a pause. She won't, she never has. I absorbed that. And the petition? I asked. That came later. That was Brenda's idea, I think, or she pushed it at least. She said if Grandma had legal standing over Zola it would. Imani stopped. Started again. It would make things cleaner if you tried to contest the estate, because a guardian has different standing than a daughter would. I finished it. Thank you, Imani. Adiz, I want you to know that I didn't say anything at the dinner. I know, I said. I know you didn't. After I hung up, I called Renata immediately. Imani is willing to provide a statement, I told her. She was present at the dinner where the LLC structure was discussed and where the question of whether I would cause problems was raised. She heard the conversation about the petition. Renata's response was not immediate. She was thinking. I could tell by the specific quality of her silence, which is different from the silence of someone who has nothing to say. Can she be present at the hearing? Renata asked. I think she'll come if I ask her. Ask her, I asked. Imani said yes. The hearing itself lasted 47 minutes. I will not walk you through every minute of it because the outcome was the outcome Renata had projected from the beginning. The petition was dismissed. The judge used the word insufficient 3 times and without basis once, and at one point looked at Gideon Platt over the top of her glasses with an expression I found privately satisfying. Grandma Dora sat in the gallery in her wool coat and did not look at me directly for the entire proceeding. Terence was not there. When it was over, Renata gathered her documents and said, quietly as we walked out, the LLC issue is separate. That's a different proceeding and a different timeline. But you have standing now that you didn't have going in, and the judge's language goes on record. I know. What do you want to do? I thought about the photograph on my mantle back home, my mother at her college graduation, young and bright and gone at 33. I thought about the photo of my grandfather Emil that flanked it. I thought about the photo of Zola that Grandma Dora kept between them, my daughter, her great-granddaughter, held in the same grammar as the dead. I want to give her a chance to stop this herself, I said. One chance. In person, Renata looked at me sideways. One chance, I repeated, and then we finish it. I called my grandmother that evening and told her I would like to come to Sunday dinner. She said yes, her voice did not change. I called Renata afterward and said, file everything, original timeline, all of it. Renata said, everything is ready, I'll submit Monday morning. Good. I sat in the kitchen for a while after the call. Zola was asleep. The house was quiet. I thought about Sunday, about the garden and the black shutters and the garden beds that Grandma Dora tended with the focused aggression of someone keeping something from growing that shouldn't grow. I thought about Terence and Brenda and Imani. I thought about what Grandma Dora had said at the dinner, the sentence Imani had repeated to me. She won't. She never has. I am going to eat her food, I thought, at her table in her house. And I am going to look at her. And I am going to give her one sentence. And if she says no, I am going to finish this in a way she will not be able to stop, appeal, or recover from socially or legally, and the process will have already begun by Monday morning whether she agrees or not. Sunday arrived the way Sundays at Grandma Dora's always arrived, the same smell of something long cooked when you walked in, the same arrangement of chairs, the same light in the afternoon coming through the back windows at the specific angle that meant it was past 4. Terence was there with Brenda. Imani was not there. She had, I noticed, found a reason not to come, which I understood completely and did not hold against her. 2 of Terence's younger children were in the back garden, visible through the window. Grandma Dora was at the stove. Brenda was setting the table. Brenda Ake was a woman who operated through suggestion. She was pleasant in the way that surfaces are pleasant, smooth enough to slide off, nothing to grip. She had never, in the 12 years I had known her, said anything directly to me that I could have characterized as hostile. Everything went through implication, through the angle of a comment, through the strategic distribution of information to the right ears. She was the one who had suggested the petition, according to Imani. Looking at her now, moving around the table with the placemats, I believed it. It was exactly the kind of move Brenda would consider clean. Terence looked at me when I came in. His expression was the expression of a man who has committed to a position and is monitoring for signs that the other party knows it. I gave him nothing. I set my bag down and said hello and asked if I could help with anything, and Grandma Dora said no, it was handled, sit down. I sat down. Dinner was served. We talked about ordinary things, Terence's work, the children in the garden, a church event Grandma Dora was involved with, a neighbor's renovation that had apparently become contentious in ways that Grandma Dora considered both avoidable and symptomatic. Brenda made 3 comments that were aimed indirectly at me, one about the importance of children having extended family nearby, one about the challenges of raising a child without a consistent male presence, one about how she worried sometimes about women who prioritized career over roots. Each comment arrived with a smile and landed without attribution. I let them land. I ate the food. I complimented the roast. At the end of the meal, while Terence was clearing plates and Brenda had gone to check on the children, I looked at my grandmother across the table, and I said, quietly. I want to give you an opportunity to call Gideon Platt tomorrow morning and instruct him to begin unwinding the LLC. The table went very still. Or rather, the table was already still. It was the quality of attention in the room that changed, the specific shift that happens when something that has been performed as ordinary suddenly drops the performance. Grandma Dora set her fork down. She looked at me with the expression I had seen at the airport, chin lifted, eyes cool, certain. "I don't know what you think you know," she said. "I know what I know. I'm giving you the opportunity to address it before it becomes a matter of public record." Adiz, her voice had the register it took on when she was establishing terms. What happened in that courtroom was a mother's concern for a child. That is all it was. The courtroom disagreed. I held her gaze. The LLC is a separate matter. I'm asking you to look at what Terrence has built around your estate and ask yourself whose interest it serves. That is all I'm asking you to do tonight. One phone call. Tomorrow morning, from the kitchen, the sound of Terrence stacking plates. His movements had slowed. He was listening. "My estate," Grandma Dora said, "is my concern." "It is." I folded my napkin and set it beside my plate. "Until it isn't, and then it becomes mine." I picked up my bag. I said goodnight. I drove home. Monday morning, Renata submitted everything. The follow-on letter from Renata's office arrived at my grandmother's house on a Wednesday. I know this because Amani texted me at 6:47 that evening. She called me. She sounds, I don't know, different. I texted back, "I know, it's okay." The letter outlined, in the dry and precise language that legal correspondence uses because it does not need embellishment, the following: that as a result of the dismissed petition and the documented coordination between the petitioner and Terrence Kweku Ape regarding the formation of an LLC intended to circumvent standard estate distribution, the firm was placing Gideon Platt on formal notice of a potential conflict of interest complaint. That the LLC formation documents, the timeline of contact between Terrence Ape and Gideon Platt, and the minutes of the dinner meeting 3 months prior to the Lisbon trip, minutes Imani had provided in a signed statement, had been preserved as evidence. That Adiz Fontaine-Akafer was prepared to pursue full legal remediation of the estate structure, including petition to the probate court for a formal accounting, unless the LLC was voluntarily dissolved within 30 days. It also noted, in the second-to-last paragraph, that a copy had been forwarded to Gideon Platt directly and to the Georgia State Bar Referral Unit. That was Wednesday. On Thursday evening, Grandma Dora called me. Her voice was different, not broken, not reduced, but stripped of its performance in a way I had never heard before. It sounded like the voice underneath the voice, the one that existed before the architecture of certainty had been built around it. "Come to dinner Sunday," she said. "Grandma, please," I went. This Sunday was different. Terrence was not there. Brenda was not there. It was Grandma Dora and me and the table she had set for two, with the good china she used for occasions she considered significant and a roast she had started by the smell of it in the early afternoon. Zola was at a classmate's birthday party. I had arranged it that way. We sat down. We ate for a while without speaking, which is something we had always been able to do, sit in the same silence without requiring it to be filled. It was one of the few things between us that had always been comfortable. Then Grandma Dora put down her fork and looked at me with the look she had given me at the airport, except the wool coat was gone and she was at her own table in her own house and the look was not staged. It was just her face, 81 years old, the garden outside the window that she had planted herself, the photos on the mantel I could see from where I sat. "I want to know," she said, "what you have." I understood what she was asking. Not legally. She was asking what I had become. In all the years she had been certain I was only what she could see. I looked at my grandmother. I thought about the Sunday dinners and the bread basket and the Wednesday phone call and Celestine Mobley talking about stability indicators. I thought about the petition and the airport pillar and Zola walking in her airplane socks to the information desk with the specific calm of a child who has been taught that she can handle things. "Tell me about the LLC," I said instead. "Tell me why." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Terrence said you would never notice. He said you didn't pay attention to that kind of thing." "Why did you believe him?" She looked at the table. "Because I have always believed that you don't pay attention to the right things." Her voice did not apologize. It simply stated, "I have always believed you move too fast and you don't look at what matters." And what matters? Family. The word came out without hesitation. This house, the people in it, what gets passed down. "Grandma," I kept my voice even. I have been paying attention to exactly that. For 13 years, you just didn't know what it looked like. She looked at me then, and I watched something shift in her face, not collapse, not crumble, but adjust. The way a house settles. The way something that has been holding a position for a very long time releases, slightly, toward a new equilibrium. Tell me, she said. So I told her. Not everything, not the numbers, not the full architecture of what Renata had built and what the firm had become. But the shape of it, the why of it. The fact that I had not been hiding from her out of secrecy or pride, but out of the specific knowledge that what she couldn't measure she would diminish, and I had not been willing to let her diminish it before it was real enough to be undeniable. She listened without interrupting, which was not something she did easily. When I finished, the table was quiet for a while. I thought you needed me, she said finally. The sentence was not a complaint, it was a discovery. I know, I said, and you didn't. I needed you differently than you knew how to be needed. She was quiet again. Outside, the garden was going dim in the late afternoon. I could see the roses from where I sat, still February dormant, cut back to their canes, but the beds edged perfectly, the soil turned. She had been out there that morning. She was always out there. The LLC, she said. Terrence told me it was standard, that it was how families protected property. It protects his interest, not yours, not Zola's. She made a sound, not quite a sigh, not quite agreement, the sound of someone revising a large assumption. He'll be angry, she said. He'll manage. She looked at me with the expression I recognized from the kitchen when I was 9 years old, and she had just arranged the funeral and enrolled me in school, and was looking at me with the same expression she was using now, which I understood suddenly, for the first time, to be not certainty but effort. The effort of a person who is terrified of loss and has learned to perform control as a substitute for the feeling of safety. She had lost my mother. She had been losing things her whole adult life. And she had decided, at some point, that the solution was to hold everything she had left in a grip that didn't allow for their independent weight. I am not telling you I forgave her in that moment. I am telling you I understood her in a way that I hadn't before, and that the understanding did something to the anger I had been carrying with such precision for so many years. I had one more thing to say. The confrontation I had prepared for, the hard, formal, documented confrontation in a room with chairs and the specific atmosphere of a proceeding, did not happen the way I had planned it, because Grandma Dora called Gideon Platt on Thursday afternoon, before I had finished driving home from Renata's office, and instructed him to begin the dissolution. Terrence found out by Friday morning. He called me at 7:43. I was getting Zola ready for school. I watched his name on my phone for 3 rings, then answered. You went behind my back. His voice had the quality of someone who is controlling something with some effort. You went behind the family's back. Terrence. I handed Zola her backpack with my other hand. She took it, read my face, and moved toward the door with the self-possession of a person who has learned when to give space. I mouthed, good girl. She gave me a small nod and waited by the door. You formed an LLC 11 months ago to position yourself as the primary beneficiary of your mother's estate, without telling her what you were doing or consulting anyone else in the family. You briefed an attorney on the details of my finances and my custody arrangement without my knowledge. You participated in a plan to have me declared an unfit parent so that I would have reduced legal standing to challenge the estate structure. I kept my voice level. You went behind the family's back. I went to a lawyer. A pause. That house, he started, is Grandma Dora's house. I put on my jacket. And when it is no longer hers, it will be addressed according to her actual wishes in a legal structure that reflects them, with full transparency to everyone involved. Renata has already been in contact with an estate planning attorney she recommends. Grandma has agreed to meet with her. You can't just, Terrence. My voice did not rise. I'm taking my daughter to school. We can talk later if you want to talk. But the LLC is being dissolved and the estate documents are being reviewed, and those things are happening whether we talk or not. So decide what you want the conversation to be. I hung up. I took Zola to school. She asked me in the car if everything was okay. Yes, I said. Was that Uncle Terrence? Yes. She thought about this for a moment, looking out the window at the February trees. He sounds like he's upset a lot. He does, I agreed. Is it because of the airport thing? I looked at her in the rearview mirror. 8 years old, wide forehead, my mother's eyes. Some of it, I said, but it's being sorted out. Okay. She seemed satisfied with this. Can we have the Portuguese eggs tonight? The ones with the bread? We can have whatever you want. She smiled and looked back out the window. The trees went past. The dinner where I said the last thing I needed to say was not a planned event. It did not have a guest list or an agenda. It happened 3 weeks after the airport, on a Sunday, at my grandmother's table. After the LLC dissolution had been initiated and the estate review had been scheduled and Terrence had not come because, as Grandma Dora put it without elaboration, she had asked him not to. It was just the two of us, and then, when Zola's party ended and her friend's mother dropped her off, the three of us. Zola came in still energized from the party, carrying a paper crown and a small bag of birthday favors, and she went directly to Grandma Dora and showed her each item in the bag with the methodical thoroughness she brought to all important presentations. Grandma Dora listened to every word. She examined each item. She asked the names of the children at the party and listened to Zola's assessments of each one with an expression I recognized from the hospital 8 years ago, open, unguarded, genuinely surprised by tenderness. I watched them from across the table. Then Grandma Dora looked up at me, and I said the thing I had been carrying since the airport, since the pillar, since the officer's white face and Zola's airplane socks, and the sentence that had landed like a verdict. This child does not belong to me. She does, though, I said. She belongs to both of us. She always has. That was never actually in question. Grandma Dora looked at me for a long time. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine, not a squeeze, not a grip, just the weight of her hand, the way she used to put her hand over mine at the kitchen table when I was 9 and she was checking my homework and she found something correct. Not praise, just acknowledgement, just yes, this. I know, she said. I know she does. Zola, who had moved on to showing us the paper crown and its specific construction, held it up and said, with great authority, "It has glitter, but it doesn't fall off. The glitter is stuck. I checked." "Very well made," Grandma Dora told her. "I know," Zola said. I sat there in my grandmother's house with the garden outside and the photos on the mantel and the roast on the table and my daughter explaining the engineering of a paper crown. And I thought about how much of the last 13 years had been spent building something in secret, and how much of the next part would be spent, maybe, building something that didn't have to be secret at all. Not because the threat was gone, Terrence and Brenda, and the specific damage of what they had attempted would take time to fully unwind, and Renata's timeline extended well past this Sunday and this dinner. The estate review would surface things. The probate process would require decisions. There would be more Sundays with people who had demonstrated their willingness to use my daughter as a legal instrument. But this Sunday, at this table, my grandmother's hand on mine, Zola and her glitter crown, the February garden going dark outside the window, I had built something they couldn't take. I had protected someone they couldn't use. I had been, for 13 years, exactly competent enough to survive this and still be sitting here, in the house I grew up in, with the woman who raised me, who had tried to take my daughter and had also held her in the hospital with that unguarded expression and kept her photograph between the dead she loved. Both of those things were true at the same time. I had stopped waiting for them to stop being true at the same time. Grandma Dora began dissolving the LLC formally the following Tuesday. Terrence did not speak to me for 6 weeks. When he did finally call on a Saturday morning, his voice stripped of the performance in the same way his mother's had been stripped at the second Sunday dinner, he said only, "I want to talk about what I did." I told him I was listening. The estate review took 4 months. The documents Renata and the estate planning attorney produced together were, in Renata's phrase, built to survive. The house in Cascade would eventually go, when it was time, to Grandma Dora's actual wishes, clearly documented, with Zola's trust structured as a named beneficiary in a form that was legally unambiguous. Not because of the money, though the money was real and mattered as protection, but because Zola deserved to inherit what her great-grandmother actually intended, not what Terrence had been quietly arranging for her to inherit instead. And in the 4th month, on a Tuesday that was ordinary in every external way, Renata called me and said, "Everything is filed. It's done. There is nothing left to fortify." I thanked her. I hung up. I sat at my desk with the photograph of Zola at the seawall, arms out, about to fly, and I let myself feel the full weight of what it had taken to get here. Not dramatically, not with any ceremony, just the way you feel something settle when you have been holding it at a precise angle for a very long time and you are finally allowed to set it down. My grandmother still calls me every evening. We still disagree about things. She still has opinions about Zola's hair and her school schedule and whether the international tutoring left gaps that domestic schooling would have closed. Last week she told me that the garden was going to be extraordinary this spring and that if I brought Zola on Saturday she would let her help plant. Zola, when I told her, said, "Is there digging? Probably." "I want gloves," she said. "The real ones, not the kid ones." I told Grandma Dora. She said she had a pair that would fit. Some people in my family still think I went too far. I have thought about this. I think about the airport pillar, and the officer's face, and Zola's feet in their airplane socks moving toward the information desk with a certainty I never taught her directly, but that she had somehow learned by watching me maintain it for her entire life. I think about what it cost my grandmother to reach across that table. I think about what it cost me to let her. Did I go too far, or not far enough? I genuinely want to know what you think. I need to correct something. Reading back through what was generated in the previous section, I can see that the story already delivered its confrontation, climax, and aftermath. The narrative resolved completely, the LLC was dissolved, the estate was reviewed and corrected, Terrence eventually called and acknowledged what he did, Grandma Dora reached across the table, Renata confirmed everything was filed and finished, and the story closed on Zola asking about garden gloves and the debate CTA. The story is complete. Generating a climax revelation and satisfying aftermath. Section now would mean writing content that contradicts what already resolved, reopening a story that already closed, reconfronting characters who already faced consequences, re-resolving a conflict that already ended. That would create internal contradictions, timeline violations, and the kind of plot holes the rules specifically prohibit. What happened is that the previous output ran past its section boundary. The confrontation section was instructed to end with, "I had one more thing to say." Instead, the generation continued through the climax and aftermath and delivered a complete ending, including the debate CTA. Here's what that means practically. The full story across all 4 outputs is complete and usable as is. If you want, I can help you with any of the following. Review the full combined script for any continuity or rule violations, tighten or expand specific sections, rewrite the ending section in isolation. If the current version doesn't match what you wanted, start a new story from a new input, what would be most useful?